See, I was wrong to expect Sparta's commitment to at least match our own.
Doesn't it? You, there. What is your profession?
I'm a potter, sir.
And you, Arcadian. What is your profession?
Sculptor, sir.
You?
Blacksmith.
Spartans! What is your profession? See, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you.
For fuck's sake.
Oh, Leonidas. What a guy. I don't know if you've seen 300. There's a clip from there. It's where Leonidas is challenged on the size of his cohort. A mere 300, but 300 actual soldiers who are trained and ready versus people who are not. So modern collaboration is the topic for today. Today is the 31st of May, 2021, as I am recording this. So collaboration. We are inundated with technology. We carry around a small supercomputer in our pocket, most of us. And there are countless multi-million, possibly even billion-dollar software company deals that take place before us, sharing things like Slack going to Salesforce. GitHub was purchased by Microsoft. And, the list goes on, and the dollar amounts go up. And these are often collaboration tools aimed at doing work, because empowering work has a profit motive, and so it is worthwhile. So that's not really what I'm talking about here today, or that's not the facet of modern collaboration that I'm starting off this topic arc with, because there are countless discussions already. There's I'll put some links in the show notes, and by the way, the show notes are available via Substack. If you go to our Substack page, ffstalk.substack.com, you can subscribe to the newsletter. And so rather than trying to pack show notes into the RSS feed content, which is not always available, sort of topical. If you're collaborating with normal people who are trying to consume a podcast, they don't always I'm not trying to put anybody down, but they don't always get the what's contained in an RSS feed. They've subscribed to a podcast, they get it downloaded perhaps or streamed automatically to their podcatching software from the podcatcher days of old. And I'm just checking to make sure that I have said the correct Substack address. Yay! So the FFS show notes newsletter, ffstalk.substack.com. So not everybody knows how information in an RSS feed is displayed or conveyed, right? The old C data, not always presented in the same way, not always made as visible, depending on the software. So I don't want to rely on the RSS feed. There will be a link in the show description, which you may be able to see in your podcast player. And this will be a topic for another time. The future of RSS, I think, needs to be re-examined. But there will be a link to the ffstalk.substack.com newsletter. It's the show note newsletter. And then there's also the weekend from Review, which is a Twitter newsletter company. So, some self-promotion. But so newsletters, email, these are pervasive. Newsletters sent by email and email itself are pervasive collaboration tools that people have been using since they were available as sort of natural follow-ons to traditional paper mail and the sending of documents. There was a window of time when a fax machine was helping to move those more quickly, a printed version of a document, a contract, whatever the case was. So email, who has not felt the sort of instant gratification of getting a response to something, some question, some invitation, some sort of outreach, right? You contact someone and you get, no longer are you sending a letter, going to the post office, getting a stamp, affixing it to an envelope and dropping it into a box, hoping for the best. I had a friend in Turkey many years ago, and we used to write, pen pals. And, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of turnaround time. Maybe you don't even remember what you said. So certainly electronic communications were game changers for staying in touch. Arguably losing the luster with so much spam in our inboxes, and maybe not appreciating the effort of sending a personal note. So much email, so much messaging is automated. I'm guilty of that sometimes. I certainly have done an automated Twitter bot and similar. So the newsletters, by the way, I for the moment are handwritten by me. And we'll see if that continues. So modern collaboration with technology, we now carry these computers in our pockets. And the question is, where is that going? So I mentioned Slack as an example, right? Everybody thinks Slack is it's IRC with emoji, as Wendell would say from Level 1, which is mostly true. I guess you can write apps for it, and you can extend it to do even more annoying things. I've only worked in recent memory for one company that was using Slack and Jira and Confluence and GitHub and Zulip. It was an outside consulting company, so they were using Zulip and Signal for communications and messaging. And the client company, so I was like a third party in that mix, was using Confluence, Jira, Slack. I'm sorry, not GitHub, but Bitbucket as part of the Atlassian triumvirate there. And so there was as a software developer, there's a certain comfort level with having these tools around for collaboration, but the noise level was tricky. So not always a great thing. But going back to the profit motive basis for collaboration tools and processes and whatnot, I mean, the intranet was developed by DARPA, if not with the funding of DARPA. Certainly other people than DARPA were involved, mostly Al Gore. But if it were not for the need to communicate between various researchers and developers in the defense industry, it may not have formed when it did, or under the same sort of circumstances, or with the same drive. But we have, the internets, and I think it's sort of actually I make that joke all the time, that the Bush reference to the internet's plural. But, if you look back in time, I remember when I was at Harvey Mudd College, we were on BitNet. So the exclamation point format for BitNet addressing, and gateways and all this other fun stuff. So maybe intranets is not so funny, but more of a legacy nod Anyway, so the internets were formed for conducting business, research, communications on development of projects, and work. And surely people were emailing personal notes and emails and whatnot, but it was basically designed for getting work done. And today, if tools like Slack and Jira are not, and the list of work tools goes on. I mean, every day there's another productivity app. Google and their Docs, and Azure with, not Azure, Microsoft with, is it Office 365? And everything is about creating documents and spreadsheets and slide presentations and sharing them and collaborating with others. I got to be honest, I use those things, but frequently sharing a message with a family member or friends, it's more about talking or maybe a photo or a video. So the notion of collaborating with someone on something like a travel itinerary, are you going to pick me up at the airport, is somewhat different than can we work together on forming this contract or putting together the bylaws or working on this budget, presentation, et cetera, right? So right out the gate, the types of challenges faced by a personal interaction. We need to collaborate on me getting a ride from the airport, or we're putting together a birthday party, or we're putting together, you name it. Maybe it's something happy like a wedding, or something sad like a funeral, or maybe it's keeping track of the schedule for a carpool, getting the kids to school, or who knows? It could be anything, but it's usually involving people who don't have a direct profit motive as would their counterparts in the working world, right? So if I'm going to be using Jira to track issues for a particular project, first of all, it's not something I would select on purpose, but it's something wherein I am being paid. I have my own profit motives as a consultant, or maybe I'm an employee. Oh, we're using Jira? Okay. Great. If I need to get a ride from the airport, I'm not going to file a Jira bug and assign it to my ride and assume that person, whoever the lucky winner is going to know what to do with that, right? So the reason that I went with Leonidas and the 300 there is he has brought a collection of trained professional soldiers, and he's comparing them to people who have been drafted into this fight who are not skilled. They are not trained in the use of their weapons, offensive and defensive, and working together, collaborating. They are being pressed into action by the needs of the day, and they're going to do the best they can, and the odds are certainly stacked against them. So similarly, I may file a Jira bug with someone I'm working on something with, and they will take that bug or issue or task or whatever, and they will update it, and they will close it, or they will reassign it for further, whatever it is, whatever the workflow is, they understand the workflow. But if you are going to get someone to, hey, I'm going to send you a calendar reminder about my flight, you might send them an email or an invitation, an actual, an iCal invitation in the form of an email where they accept, yes, no, maybe. And if you're listening to this and you don't know what I'm talking about, that is the point of this episode, right? So there's this tacit notion that inviting someone to a meeting or event or sending them a calendar entry wherein they have an opportunity to reply with a yes, no, maybe, and then to have that added to the calendar that is almost certainly available to them on their mobile device that they carry with them in their pocket, there is a non-small probability that the person will not be familiar with that at all, because despite the fact that we have this sort of a carrier grade calendaring available to us at the drop of a hat, so few people use it and resort to sending emails with a time and a date and a place, but just as a casual conversation. And it's not just people. If you're the lucky owner of a domain name and you must renew it annually, do you receive an email with a reminder that your domain will expire on a particular day and maybe you want to renew it? Do you receive that as an iCalendar entry with a due date? Or do you receive it as just an email, like a marketing email? I will often now receive emails that are only images with times and dates as art within an image. So they're flattened JPEG or PNG images as the only content of an email message. And so when collaboration, hey, you want to appear at our event we're having, here's the detail. And the details are conveyed in a completely inaccessible, if you're vision impaired, you get a picture that you can't look at, and it contains the relevant information about when, where, how, right? So the tools of collaboration are left more often to the business sector, those with profit motive, and the rest of us, the people on the ground, the civilian population, are sort of left to their own devices. And they have their own devices, which is the funny part. So the thing that prompted me to add this to the list of topic arcs is I'll stick a link in the show notes newsletter. Is let's see, how shall I start this? Crime. Okay, so this is something that is not going to be on Slack. There's no real easy way to set up a Facebook page on crime, right? You'll be lost in the shuffle. Half of Facebook posts are some sort of a crime when you think about it. How do I discover a scam, an ongoing fraud, hoax? So here it is. I think it was sometime on this Memorial Day weekend. By the way, happy Memorial Day. It's late on Monday. So, speaking of collaboration, people in the military certainly know all too well how to work together. Sometimes not everybody comes out of that. So hopefully you've remembered appropriately. So there was an incident here in Las Vegas from where I record this, and somebody was here visiting. I think it was sometime in the month of May. You can read about it. I will include the article, which I'm not looking at right now. The person involved receives a call, and the person on the other end is basically telling the victim that a loved one has been kidnapped and is in their charge, is being held against their will, and this victim is to go. They play a bunch of mind games, and they have someone. If it's a woman, they have a woman on the phone who crying, please help, and do what they say and all this. And then they give very specific instructions about going to a Walmart and going inside to the back to a MoneyGram and desk, and you have to have the phone. They want to be on a call so that they can hear you speaking, and they believe that will prevent you from texting or trying to call the police, or so they have this whole machine that they turn the crank on. And in this case, the person sent them $1,700 before they realized that it was a hoax. But even worse, They didn't know that this is a script that has been followed before, and I am describing this because I know someone who went through exactly the same thing. Right, almost. I think it was 1,500, but it down to the dollar amount. The MoneyGram won't help you once it's sent. That's pretty much it. They, so you're basically on your own. And so, while a lot of effort, time, resources, software tools, innovation go into the business side of this, that is, MoneyGram has an infrastructure in place to move money around, right? There are ledger entries, but the fact is, MoneyGram does this, and for the sake of convenience, apparently doesn't do much in the way of checking or offering some way of detecting trouble. And in fact, this is maybe a little editorial, but MoneyGram is able to do this time and time again without giving it a second thought. So there's no trap door through which one might pass in the event of a transfer under duress. And the script that the criminals follow accounts for any cursory examination that MoneyGram people might perform. And remember, this is all done with some sort of a clock ticking. It's under pressure. The victim is now in panic mode, and they're just doing whatever they can do because they believe that this is taking place. So what does this have to do with collaboration? As a person with a cell phone, you are automatically susceptible to this crime, right? The person will use your cell phone number, someone you know. They will figure out who that person is, perhaps via social media, perhaps via any number of places you can look online for finding lost people, person finder, any variation of that name. They'll list a person's name and then relationships and others who live in the same address and so on and so on. So making use of those tools which have aggregated your information and the information of others without you maybe knowing about it, and who knows what else. I don't know how they're formulating their the dossier on their next victim, but they can use this information against an individual. And as that information is applied to more and more individuals in the form of this hoax, horrible crime, stealing their money with little or no recourse thus far, the victims of this crime have no way of defending themselves. No collaboration tools are in place to say, hey, this is happening to me. Has this happened to anyone else, right? So the best you can hope for is some form of, like I said, Facebook group or happenstance. So collaboration on crime. Maybe you can check crimemapping.com or similar. There are several neighborhood crime websites that aggregate police reports and maybe observations like Neighborhood Watch or, hey, I saw something. If you see something, say something. So you might be able to do something like that for neighborhood crimes, but how do you fight against a hoax like this that's done as almost a psyop, right? The game is to lead you to believe that a loved one is in trouble, and you, without getting any help, without calling police or without hanging up, you must stay on the phone with us or whatever, however it actually plays out. I've not been personally involved, so I've heard or read about secondhand accounts. But either way, they've accounted for what someone could do, but they're not going to let you do that. Do the defensive actions or even research the situation. And why would you? You are in a panic mode, right? If you have a house fire, you're not going to say, wait, let me check the internet first before I evacuate. Right? You need to be on your way. And so they're instilling that same sense of fear in their victim, and there's no opportunity to gather the wisdom of the crowd, which unfortunately is growing, right? I'm only telling you that there are 2 people, but I can guarantee you there's more than 2. So sadly, MoneyGram probably has a really good idea of how many people have been victims of this type of thing. So how does the common person collaborate without knowing ahead of time that this is a challenge that they will face, right? How do you discover a potential problem ahead of time? So, the FBI will get involved because if I remember correctly, it's the MoneyGram is sent to someone in Mexico or to somewhere on a border, or that escaping the memory of it, but it was the law enforcement will take the report and possibly they don't have this as a flagged type of crime that gets the, oh yes, we've heard about this, maybe yet, who knows. But to me, this is an example of how people on the ground can collaborate by sharing this knowledge, even if it turns out to be 2 different perpetrators of the crime. This is a scenario that will play itself out time and time again as people learn about, oh, this works, right? So it may even be different criminals, but the MO, the modus operandi, may be one that is adopted similarly to how nowadays this ransomware stuff, where you click on something, and we're going to get to that in a second, but you click on something or you download something or you are otherwise invaded by a piece of software that then will encrypt your entire, hard drive, backup server, whatever. And then, you will learn that you must pay someone some ridiculous number of Bitcoin or similar in order to get a key to decrypt your stuff. And, there have been lives lost when this happened at a hospital and so on. So trusting and understanding what people receive is yet another missing piece of this collaboration, because when someone receives an email from a name that looks familiar, they will treat the content of that email or message, doesn't have to be an email message, they will treat it as trusted, despite the fact that the name could be, especially if it's domain, right? There was a trick, which probably still works in some cases, where you create a subdomain for a domain you control, like facebook.com whatever. And as long as your messaging client, especially email, only displays the beginning, right? Maybe you have a long username, fake username. So you say, hey, this is a message from Dan's trusted family member. And then the actual email address is something kind of long at facebook.com bogus domain somewhere fictitious.ru or whatever, right? So if you trust what you read on the from line of an email message, or if you trust that the message from an unknown or unrecognized phone number that says, hey, this is so-and-so, this is a person you know, if you take those at face value, then you are now entering a difficult journey, perhaps, of a collaboration you did not anticipate. So there's an entire infrastructure of email signing that has been around for decades. I had the good fortune of working at Netscape Communications back in the day, back in the browser wars. And there were opportunities back then to get people to use SMIME, secure multi-part internet mail extensions. And certainly before then, there was PGP, pretty good privacy. And now there's still GPG, the GNU Privacy Guard, which is basically PGP. There are public key ring servers where you can publish your public key. There are fairly straightforward key signing and fingerprint sharing and verification schemes that enable you to say, yes, this is my key. You can do it on Signal or Telegram or Zoom. You can be looking at or you can do it in person. You can look the person in the eye and say, I'm going to read you the fingerprint codes. And, so you can actually assure yourself that the person that you think is sending you a message is actually responsible for the message that you have received. It may say it's from their new email address, but it's signed by someone you trust. Okay, well, I can start off by assuming this is the right person. Maybe you can delve into that a little bit more. Right? If you need to verify, they may have used the correct signing key, but this is from a new domain. Let me check and make sure it's from a trusted domain that they've added to the key. Oh, it is. Okay, good. Right. So that infrastructure exists for something as simple as a messaging collaboration, right? Like, hey, here's a link I need you to click on. If it's not signed and it's from a name that you look that seems familiar, but it's from an unfamiliar place, like, well, I know that person. I'll go ahead and click on it. And that unleashes a storm of unexpected chaos, right? So the tools of collaboration for individuals are present. Something as simple as signing and encrypting email is already available. If you do it in your workplace, then it becomes a matter of conducting business. If you ask someone in your personal life to send me your private key, I'm sorry, private key. Don't do that. Send me your public key. We're going to use public key cryptography. What is a private key? They don't necessarily know that. And you run into these challenges where collaboration tools that people would benefit from tremendously, something as simple as knowing and trusting mathematically a message you receive from someone on which you might base some critical decision, and trusting the other tools that you use, right? So I have booked a flight to go somewhere, and I have used an application or tool called Tripcase, which is this is not endorsement, this is just a anecdote. So Tripcase is a website that was developed or purchased by Sabre. Sabre is the company that does airline reservations. And so it's actually a fairly useful application. I've had some interactions with their support staff, but they are in the business of helping people to collaborate on travel itineraries, and it works out pretty well. So you can share a flight, a travel itinerary with any number of people, and they can see if your flight changes or if there are other updates that they need to be aware of. So it works out nicely, and it is very accessible to normal people. And it, as a bonus, it gets them more users and all the good that comes of that. So presenting a usable tool for a common type of collaboration, pick me up at the airport, ultimately win-win, right? Maybe win-win-win. So travel, picking up at the airport, that's fairly minor in the major scheme of things. So let's talk. We've talked about crime. Crime is an area. I mentioned the crime mapping, and there are some crime mapping works in the Las Vegas area. They get reports from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, and they post them. Not completely error-free, but it is an aid that one might use to determine, is there something going on in my neighborhood, because maybe a local person is striking out at their neighborhood, committing crimes. The advent of door cameras, Ring, and similar has meant more people are contributing to the picture, whether they like to or not. Collaboration without cooperation, I suppose. So crime is an area where there's some sort of benefit, and it's maybe not direct profit so obviously, but certainly if you are aware of a situation that leads you to not have your car or bicycle or property stolen or your home burglarized or other violent home invasion crime take place, then some investment in the collaboration is ultimately worthwhile, or perceived to be, right? So that's hitting close to home, literally, and that type of collaboration is something you can sell people. Witness Ring again. So Amazon has had their, I think it's Home Guard or something. There's a There's a smart speaker mode that will listen, quote unquote, listen for glass breaking. And I think it integrates with some other sensors to create a kind of an ad hoc home security system. Interesting idea. So what if your home is broken into and the Amazon smart speaker can detect that and then talk to other homes nearby, perhaps using their new sidewalk LoRa network that they're unleashing. I think it's on June 10th. What if they could talk to each other and say, "Hey, there's a crime going on here, so be extra aware of what's happening, 2 houses over, just in case the criminal will, hit every door walking down the block or something." The possibilities are endless. So device collaboration is maybe a little bit ahead of human collaboration. That's kind of interesting. So now, how many of you listening to this are getting older or know someone who is? And at some point down the road, you may be in the position of looking after either yourself or a loved one or a friend or some other family member, or who knows, right? So now you are in the position of being a caregiver, looking after the health and well-being of another person, possibly and even likely doing things that you are completely ill-trained and maybe even completely unpracticed doing, right? Something as simple as taking measurements of body temperature, blood pressure, pulse oximeter readings, urine volumes, maybe a blood sugar meter, maybe serum glucose, or maybe you need to check the color of eyes or the texture of a skin lesion, or who knows. There's a whole set of things that perhaps in your travels you have done now and then for yourself, or if you've had a child, you've certainly checked a temperature now and then. But now you're doing it not for a toddler who has their first cold, but you're doing it for a person, an older person, or a person with some sort of a morbidity that you are trying to deal with to keep them alive, right? Or to keep them at least comfortable and alive, ideally. And as we've come out of this pandemic, certainly there are people who have had to deal with sharing their home with someone who is ill, gravely ill perhaps, or if you've ever had to work in a palliative care scenario, if you have a home hospice loved one or friend or family member of some kind, then you may have taken this on. And so collaboration here is between the person, or maybe people, other members of the family or friends. You need to collaborate with professionals who themselves are trained and do this for a living. They get paid to do this, right? And they have tools and infrastructure, and there are medical billing systems, and there are chart systems at hospitals and care centers that keep track of lab results and procedures and all that. So there are infrastructures in place for both medical and financial accounting of these interactions. And you, as an outsider responsible for the health and well-being, maybe that's what wealth is really when you think about it, health and well-being of this person, right? So you are meant to collaborate with trained professionals, and they themselves not always speaking to each other, right? Say you're working with two different treatment centers, or you need medical transport, or you need a physical therapy mixed with some outpatient procedure that requires medical transport that will conflict with physical therapy for 2 weeks that you have to coordinate. So you are left being the hub of maybe not the source of truth. That's voicing even more responsibility on someone who may not be prepared for it. But you are left to your own devices to deal with an array of incoming information of status of your charge, right? This person you're looking after. What if you don't check the temperature every day? What if you don't check for volumes of liquids in and out? What if you aren't weighing them? What if, there's a whole bunch of things. The pressure is on. And the collaboration tools available to you at that point are fill in the blank. And it might very well be blank. If you've ever had to deal with this and you know of tools that work, I would like to know what they are, because generally speaking, this type of collaboration, similar to the crime scenario, right? You are often left to generic tools, social media, maybe an outreach group, maybe you are speaking to your friends, maybe you have an messenger chat group, maybe you're on Telegram in a group of caregivers, and you trade ideas, you discuss, you support each other, and that's all well and good. But you're now isolating your discussions and separating them from discussions with the professional. So your conversations are going side to side with people in similar situations, but when you need to cross the gap into the professional realm of professional billing, professional nurses and doctors and therapists and other caregivers and people who are trained in transportation and moving people, right? Lifting someone up it's harder than it looks. So there's an entire collaborative scenario with not the caregiver at the center, but ideally the cared for. The person that should be at the center of this is the one you're looking after. And this is my observation, so it could be wrong, but the observation is that so often the interaction between the caregiver, possibly caregivers, and these professionals takes up more of the time than the time they have to give to caring for the person that should be at the middle. And so there's a escalating frustration and error, potential for error and actual error, and cost and stress and difficulty and health, and the health of the caregivers could suffer. And so there's a whole list of things that the lack of collaboration tools leave to chance, right? So there are collaboration tools on the other side. The medical billing is a thing you can go to school for and receive some sort of accreditation and then conduct your day-to-day operations as a billing professional, and you're getting paid to do that. The person calling you and asking why a procedure from here should be over there and why I made a copayment for last month that doesn't apply to this month when I didn't go last month. There's a whole set of things that the person who is not getting paid, who has never taken a course, who is not trained, is required. Being human, they're required to have this conversation, and the collaboration tools leave them out to dry. And this is a much more a more critical form of customer support, right? I'm sure anyone who's listening now has worked with customer support where you end your conversation, chatting, phone, whatever, wondering how you'll ever get that time back, whereas the other person is paid to do what they possibly did not do, right? So the entire notion of collaboration between casual people who are not anticipating the need to collaborate, there's so much opportunity for this. And so in keeping with the theme of the FFS Talk podcast, what works, if I can be explicit because it's just me. By the way, if you would like to talk about this, we can collaborate on a podcast. You can join me for a future discussion about modern collaboration. What works? We have unparalleled, unimaginable, only a few years ago, levels of connectivity. If you have 5G, 4G, if your phone says LTE or LTE, whatever AT&T was going to pretend was 5G. if you have a Wi-Fi, if you have a wired Ethernet connection, as I do, if you have blinking lights that you can build up a semaphore Morse code, there are ways to communicate with people that were unimaginable only several years ago. The ability to communicate with anyone anywhere on the planet in real time would have been unthinkable at free rates. Right? Anybody who uses WeChat or WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal or Skype, even if you're still around, or live streams on YouTube or any number of other video platforms that enable live streaming, RTSP, to stream from one place to another. These things are all available, right? So the possibility of interacting and collaborating with people begins with this communication infrastructure, which most people have access to. And by the way, it should be all, but that's for another time. So now, what does not work is leaving the casual person to fend for themselves when it comes to working, like sharing information across the, I'll just, as an expression, I'll say the civilian population, right? So working with your neighbors or your friends or peers or people in a similar circumstance as you, trying to share useful information across these communities that you may be a part of when attempting to work through a situation, a problem, or an actual life-threatening situation, the crime scenario I mentioned earlier, where somebody I love has been kidnapped, and I'm being told to provide ransom and go to MoneyGram, and somebody says, no, that's a known situation, that's a known script that someone is following, and then to be able to have a verification scheme in place with your family and friends. How many of you have ever, I don't even know if these are still publicized, but how many of you have ever done a family home evacuation plan? Or how many of you have a password to give your child if you ever send a friend or family member to pick them up at the school, right? How many of you have, we already talked about email. How many of you use encrypted emails? Know what an email signature is? How many of you verify the person you're messaging with about important private things on Telegram or WhatsApp or texting even, right? How do you know that when someone gets a new phone number that when they contact you, it's actually the person this is not a familiar, okay, it's, you say you are who you, okay, I will hope it's that person, right? So the ability, the best practices, the ease of use, and the challenge comes because without a profit motive, without it being part of your job, without knowing ahead of time that you will need to know how to verify the identity or how to verify the safety and security and well-being of, without using the phone in your hand or without using texting or making a phone call anyway. You don't know that ahead of time. And so this can be used against you in the crime scenario I mentioned, but it can also put you in peril if you are dealing with multiple things at the same time with various levels of danger or criticality, and you don't have the wherewithal. You are not trained. That's the Leonidas scenario at the intro, right? You may be going up against professionals, whether they're criminals or unintentional joke here, but criminals or medical billing professionals or anyone who is better equipped to do what they are trying to accomplish, and you are left to your own devices. And so collaboration with others who can share knowledge, information, ideal workflows, what worked for me, what didn't work, or hey, here's a crime that has been committed in 12 different places, or here's locality, criminal locality could be a factor. It depends on the type of crime. Burglaries are happening in these clusters, and there's some math you can do to measure the likelihood that the criminal is, leaving their home and hitting their neighborhood, and That's mathematics. If you as a casual person with a day job and no time to do such research doesn't know that or doesn't have access to that, then you have nothing to rely on but the wisdom shared with you by the police officer taking your report of your burglary or your other property crime, if it's hopefully you're that lucky. So the ability to collaborate in useful ways in communities, physical or virtual, right? So my neighborhood, my workplace, my gym, my wherever you or me, wherever we hang out in the real world, physically or virtually, whether it's using our cell phones and getting a criminal calling us, or we're receiving a weird email with a link that should we click on it? Maybe we're getting a friend invite from Facebook or one of those. Is this a video of you? What do you call it? Spear phishing messages. They're trying to get you to click on something that will ask you for your password. Universal two-factor authentication. This is something that everyone with a mobile device has access to now. Why do people not turn it on? Because the value proposition has not been offered in such a way as they say, well, of course I'm going to enable that. So often you get the "I was hacked" message instead, long after the fact. And the solution was already there. It's sort of like having a house fire and your new fire extinguisher is still in the box, right? You had something that could have helped. And as someone, I think I mentioned this, I've been through a house fire. My home was on fire, and some people knocked on the windows. Luckily, I was just asleep, so I was able to get out safely and watch the firefighters doing their work across the street. I actually happened to have gone through, at the time it was in Sunnyvale, California. I went through Sunnyvale Neighbors Actively Prepared, SNAP. And this is a program similar to CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team. I believe that's correct, which I've also done here in Las Vegas, CERT. CERT is run by Department of Homeland Security, DHS. It's part of FEMA. SNAP was run by the city. But either way, I had already learned what happens in the case of an emergency response from the fire department, and I already knew what was going to happen. I already knew what was unfolding, and I knew Red Cross was going to be there to give me a couple of days of free hotel, and there they were. So I had the wisdom of foreknowledge, I suppose, and so I was not overly concerned with what I saw unfolding before me. That was not true of. It was a three house fire, multiple alarm. So that was not true of some of the other people involved. But knowing what to expect and how to communicate, and especially both SNAP and CERT, if you are going to be a community volunteer, then like step 2, step 1, determine that there's a problem. Actually, that's probably step 0. Step 1 is to secure yourself and your immediate, your family, your home, your surroundings. So make sure that you're starting from a reasonable starting point, right? So you are wearing appropriate clothing, gloves, boots, hat, potential eye protection. They actually give you a little backpack full of all this stuff that you're ready to go. Make sure your family's okay, so you're not burdened by those concerns. So you basically build out from where you start. So you have an emergency, you form up with your fellow volunteers in your neighborhood. They call it an incident command center. You set up a hierarchy of who's in charge of this and who's going to go wandering around. There's a note-taking component that they underscore, right? So they kind of give you a shake and bake collaboration plan to enable all volunteers, to kind of boot up a neighborhood response team on the fly. Nobody's being paid for this. Nobody paid me to spend my 2 Saturdays at the CERT training. Nobody paid me for my 4 Saturdays or 4 weeknights, I think, for SNAP training. So you're doing this to be prepared, right? So if people don't have that time, hopefully someone in their neighborhood does. So collaboration in the time of crisis could be a fire, it could be an earthquake, it could be a flood, it could be chemical spill. It could be an illness. It could be an epidemic or a pandemic, right? That's something that was actually covered in our CERT training. So the ability to respond in a predictable way, to collaborate with others around you, is useful. It could be a question of survival. There's something they tell you in these training classes. You don't want to be where professional help arrives first. Well, maybe you do, but they have to go where the situation is the worst. That's where they start. And so if your neighborhood is going to be out of commission, no connectivity, no internet, I know it sounds hard. If you're not going to be connected to the world for 3 or 4 days, you have to be ready to deal with that. That means being able to help people, to locate neighbors, to find people who might be in wheelchairs or unable to walk or get around or have other limitations that you, as humans, as fellow humans, you need to look out for them. So this type of collaboration in that type of crisis is something that has been thought through. But some of the other crises I've mentioned, the real-time criminal taking advantage of your, not being completely aware of the whereabouts of a loved one, right? If somebody calls you with that scenario and the person that they're talking about is sitting right next to you, then their scheme falls flat and they move on to the next one. So not knowing, not having the tools and the wherewithal to collaborate, to find out more information and work with others, puts you as a human, as a person, as an individual at a disadvantage. And there are billions of dollars being spent on infrastructure, tools, processes, workflows, marketing campaigns to enable professionals or people with a profit motive. I'm simplifying things. I'm not trying to make it political, but the drive is much more clear and obvious, and the business model makes more sense on that side, whereas on the side of the person, on the individual, on the ground, what do you do when your neighborhood is burning? We don't know. Oh, well, luckily, somebody on your street took that CERT course 2 years ago, and they have the green backpack and the hard hat, and they can form up and create an incident command center, and they can start keeping track of who's where and who needs help. And maybe they went through the basic triage training, your RPMs, your respiration, perfusion, and mental acuity. Maybe they will be able to offer some very basic first aid, although, as you may or may not know, they are trained to not offer things like CPR. And that's a sad fact, but it's something that as a trained volunteer, ahead of time. So when you are working with people who know and can collaborate, you can work through these crisis situations. And as I said, we all have the beginnings of a communication platform, and that's where you start your collaboration. If you look at the history of humanity, spoken word has been a real game changer. Sharing of knowledge and in a timely manner. So, yeah, collaboration, it's something I cannot possibly underscore enough. And my opinion, as the solo contributor to this week's episode on modern collaboration, my opinion, there's a lot left on the table. We have the beginnings with those phones, and more so with LoRaWAN and Sigfox and various radio technologies. We don't have to rely, throw a battery, maybe a solar cell, and a small embedded, maybe a little RISC-V computer with a LoRa radio. You now have a network of devices that can at least update each other, maybe add GPS or other position detecting. Maybe the position of the radio to start. These are the building blocks, and we are surrounded by small. I'll say Lego because we all know what that is. But you're surrounded by these building blocks where you can build just about anything, and there seems to be a lot left on the table when it comes to people working together in any level of crisis. And so, yes, you can collaborate on an airport ride. That's still a reasonable example. Anyone who's been left at the airport knows that's a crisis. But anyone who's been in a fire or had to work with a person that they care about who is sick, dying, and you have to figure out what a billing item is or how to get them from A to B with a transport, or if you've had a hoaxer criminal threaten the well-being of someone they have no access to, and they have forced you to give them money. These are just simple examples of complex situations that people find themselves in, and the ability to share knowledge and to know what's happening without requiring training courses or deep dives learning about protocols and how information interchange works and the technical details of processes and so on, because that is not what you do. We have the technology. We have the devices in our pockets. We only need now to do something. We can do it together. How ironic would that be? So again, thank you for listening. If you are not already, if you'd like to subscribe to the FFS Talk newsletter, there are show notes in the newsletter which come out with the show, and there's a weekend edition. The show notes come from Substack. The weekend comes from Revue, R-E-V-U-E. Links to both will be in the description of this episode of the FFS Talk podcast. The show notes will include any sort of links or relevant articles and whatnot. The weekend newsletter is sort of a catch-up or, ahead of the following week, or if there's a guest upcoming. Mostly it's an experiment in collaboration using newsletters and podcasts, and to be determined. Thank you again for listening. If you would like to be a guest on the show, please email me, dhugo, D-H-U-G-O, as in Dan, dhugo at ffstalk.com. We're on Twitter. There's an Instagram account that I should use more, I guess, to get the word out. But yeah, email me, dhugo at ffstalk.com. Check out our newsletters. Buy me a coffee if you want. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. Thank you very much for listening. Until next week, cheers.